Hey, real estate investors and entrepreneurs. Today, I'm going to tell you about limited liability companies and how they can save you on taxes as well as protect you from lawsuits. So let's go ahead and dive right in to the Limited Liability Companies Masterclass. And the reason that this is important is because the limited liability company is the most flexible tool you can get when it comes to how do you streamline your taxes, how do you save money on taxes, and how do you protect your assets. So just in case you guys don't know me, of course, my name is Scott Royal Smith. I'm the owner of Royal Legal Solutions. I'm an attorney and entrepreneur as well as real estate investors. I built Royal Legal Solutions as a one-stop shop with over 30 employees to help people all over the country with every type of business and every type of asset to be able to have one single source of truth that connects all the puzzle pieces together. So far, we have about 2,000 clients all over the country over the last 7 years. And today I'm going to share with you some of the best practices, tips, tricks, as well as insights that we've learned over the last 7 years about limited liability companies, who should be using them and who shouldn't be using them. So what is an LLC? Well, the LLC is a limited liability corporation or company, and it's treated underneath a legal principle as if it were a separate person. So anything that your LLC does or anything that your LLC owns is actually treated legally as something separate from you. And this is true as long as it's formed correctly. So this means that it can protect your cash, it can protect your stocks, it can protect your real estate. When properly formed, these limited liabilities hold up over time. They can be very easy to understand and to use on a yearly basis. They will not complicate your life as long as they are formed in a way to do so. And they are very effective as long as they are properly formed and maintained. Now, there's a lot of myths about limited liability companies. Some people think that LLCs simply don't work. And in these cases that we've seen, and from my experience as a litigator, where I got started suing major insurance companies, what I found is that the LLCs do work, and they are very, very strong as long as they're properly used and maintained. However, if they're not properly maintained, they can be pierced. So it's important that they're formed right and that they're maintained right. Another myth that we hear is, hey, I don't need an LLC because I have insurance, and insurance is enough to protect me. Well, what we believe is that insurance is an important first step in your protection. In fact, it's your best step as a first step because it protects you against most risks most of the time. However, insurance companies are profit-seeking corporations. Their job, literally, is to collect premiums and deny coverage, especially when the claims become expensive. So, if you want to really protect yourself, of course you have insurance, but you also need limited liability company protection in the event that the insurance company doesn't protect you. If all of the assets are held in your personal name, it would mean that everything in your life is subject to that lawsuit unless you have an LLC to compartmentalize that risk. Now, a lot of people also think, and it's a very common myth, that lawsuits don't happen to honest people. But guess what? In a court proceeding, as you might imagine, people lie. It doesn't matter how honest you are if people are willing to lie about you. And honest people get sued every single day. Now, this next myth is around, can I form this LLC myself? And the reality of the situation is most people are not capable of forming and maintaining an LLC correctly that will actually stand up to a legal challenge. And the reason why is because an attorney crafting the LLC and maintaining this LLC on your behalf is looking at all of the details and has the proper systems and processes in place to ensure that those protections are going to be triggered if and when they are necessary. I've also heard people say, like, well, what about my CPA or any other type of advisor? Can't they form an LLC for me? Or can't one of these major online companies do it? And the reality is, yes, they can form it. Right? But the reality is will it actually hold up if it's ever challenged? And the question I always ask people is, hey, say you ever get sued. Are you going to call your CPA to protect you? Well, the answer to that is obviously not. You call a litigation attorney like myself, and in that instance, I'm going to ask, well, why didn't you have me form the protections in the first place? You're giving me a deck of cards that's faulty that now I have to scramble to try to protect at the last minute. So if you build these things right from the beginning, right from the start, and you take a little bit more time and a little bit more patience on the front end, the back end will be much more bountiful for you in terms of the overall investment that you're making into your future. So the top benefits that you can have with an LLC is you can start or run a business, you can lease or purchase real estate, it can save you money on taxes, it can protect your assets and your wealth, and it can preserve your good credit score in the case that you ever come subject to a lawsuit. Now remember, the LLCs treat as an entity separate from yourself. So what we want to do with LLCs is make you just like rich people do. Rich people don't own assets, they have LLCs and they have businesses that are the LLCs will own the assets and the LLCs will also conduct the businesses. You yourself as an individual should not own anything. Rich people do not own things. And this is the very first top lesson. And these are the benefits that the rich understand on their path to wealth and how they're using these entities to be able to get there and stay there. So really the fundamental question that comes into everybody's mind is whether I'm big or whether I'm small, whether I'm just starting out, do I need an LLC? When is the right time for me to do that? So let's just zoom out a second and see where do the LLCs actually fit inside of the bigger picture, because the bigger picture should influence what are the actions that we need to take today. So to do that, we look at our what we call here is our freedom temple. First, we look at the wealth creation. Then we're looking at our tax strategy to be able to see how can we save money on taxes to preserve that wealth. We look at our 5 pillars of asset protection, the anonymity, the liability, the separation, the isolation, and insurance to ensure that if lawsuits happen, we don't lose that wealth. And then we're looking to see how can we streamline and leverage our times? That way we can create more time to be able to do the things that we want. How can we properly plan for these assets to get passed to our legacy? And ultimately, after doing all of these things, what is the net effect on our personal fulfillment? And LLCs are an essential part of being able to create all of that. So there's 3 types of protection that we can typically think of when we're thinking about what does an LLC do. Here we're talking about operational protection, where we have 1 LLC per business and it's formed in the state where you do the business. You're going to be hiring all of your contractors here, conducting all of your activities for sending emails. And in these operational type of LLCs, typically we're going to see an S corporation tax election to help you save on self-employment taxes. LLCs are also used to protect soft assets. So this can store your assets safely and anonymously. Here we're looking to form 1 LLC per asset, and in some cases, or 1 LLC to hold all of the soft assets if those assets don't have individual liability attached to them, right? These can have built-in anonymity. So things that don't have individual liability attached to them are going to be things like cash, stocks, syndication investments, for example, meaning that nobody is going to directly try to sue your bank account because your bank account did something to them, right? We consider that a soft asset. And all those soft assets we can pull into 1 entity. So in this instance, if you only had soft assets and you had an active business, you would have 1 LLC to run your active business, and you'd have 1 LLC to hold your soft assets. Then we look at hard assets, which are like real estate. And here we want 1 LLC per hard asset. Why? Because each hard asset has individual liability. Somebody can slip and fall on your property and get hurt, and in that instance, if they sue that property, we want it to be compartmentalized inside of 1 LLC. And in this instance, you would form that LLC in the state where you're located. You can add anonymity to that LLC to have anonymity of the ownership of the LLC as well as anonymity of the ownership of the asset. And the local laws there are predictable to see how that LLC will get treated. Great. So now that you can see that there's 3 different types of LLCs, the question becomes is how many LLCs might you need? So if you have no assets, you have no business activities, and you have poor credit, and you're not intending on improving your credit, guess what? You're the type of person that doesn't need an LLC. But if you have good credit, right, and you want to build business credit and you want to save on taxes, you need at least 1 LLC. Think about it this way. Even if you don't have any other assets, your credit score itself is an asset. It is your access to capital. So if you're running a business, that means that somebody could sue you in connection to that business. Well, you would want to use an LLC to keep that liability separate from you, because if something goes wrong in the business, you still want your personal credit score to be good. Also, when you have an LLC and running your business, you're starting to get seasoning inside of your LLC, which is how you qualify for business lines of credit, which gives you more access to capital to help you grow your business. So getting that LLC started quickly in your career is going to be very, very important. Now, if you are a person that has an active business and you start to have some appreciable amounts of cash, stocks, or other soft assets, that's when you're going to need two LLCs. One LLC for your business, a second LLC there to hold all of your soft assets. And you will need a third or more LLCs and when you start to acquire hard assets, because each hard asset should be inside of its own LLC. And when we do it this way, what it does is it separates all of your soft assets from you, so you won't own anything more. It separates your business from you, so that way if something goes wrong in the business, it doesn't impact your personal credit score. And when we separate each one of your hard assets in their own individual LLC, if something happens on one of those properties, it doesn't affect any of your soft assets and it doesn't affect you personally. So let's talk for a second here about the operating company. I touched on it a little bit earlier. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. So this is the one LLC. This is your minimum viable protection. You can see here on the Freedom Temple, I've outlined this as saying this is of our 5 pillars of protection. Here's where we're protecting ourselves from liability. So this is going to safeguard your good credit. It's going to help you build that business credit. It can help you save on taxes if you're using the S Corporation tax selection, and it can protect you from lawsuits. For your asset holding company, this is where we talked about how we can start using multiple types of LLCs rather to be able to protect each one of those assets. So here we have 3 different types of our typical asset holding companies. We have a hub and spoke model, which is one strategy, a series LLC, which is a little bit more advanced strategy, and we have a Delaware statutory trust, which is a domestic trust, which is our most advanced strategy. Our hub and spoke model, this is a very traditional strategy, very time tested. And essentially you have a tree of LLCs, one owning each asset. Each one of those assets is in turn owned by one mothership LLC or one LLC above it. And so it kind of triangulates up to that one LLC. And that would be your basic structure. The series LLC works exactly the same way as the hub and spoke model of individual LLCs. But the series LLC is kind of like a special legal technology that allows you to create LLCs on your desktop absolutely for free and allows you infinite scalability at no additional cost. And it's the preferred method to be able to hold hard assets of various different classes. Now, the Delaware Statutory Trust is as a domestic trust. It's a trust that's created underneath state law. And the Delaware Statutory Trust is arguably even more secure than LLCs. And what they would also allow you to do in that circumstance is to be able to more easily execute 1031 exchanges and other tax saving types of tax-saving types of strategies if you're a real estate investor, but it's only good for passive types of investments. It's not good for any type of operating company. It's also not good for any type of like active business if you happen to be like a flipper. So these are your 3 major types of strategies that you can run with. When we look at 2 LLCs, this is where we get a second LLC to hold your soft assets securely. And the second LLC that we're looking for here is where we can look at holding our cash, our stocks, our syndication investments, and we're creating those layers of separation here. And as you can see here, we're still talking about the liability, but now we've also included here in our separation because we're separating out where is our liability taking place and separating that out from where some of our assets are being held. And the same thing here too, when we're talking about the 3 or more LLCs, we're not just looking at separating the assets from the operations. We're also looking at, okay, we're also going to encapsulate each individual asset itself. And this is going to be very, very important if we're ever inside of a lawsuit because lawsuits are just like any other business, right? It's if there's a lot of money there for people to go after, then almost always a lawsuit happens. But if we can break up every individual asset into its own bucket, by isolating each asset, well, very, very quickly you find out that lawsuit doesn't happen. Why? Because there's not a lot of money there for them to go after. So beyond the LLC, there's quite a bit of things that we can do. And I just want to fill you guys in on that a little bit here because a lot of people don't know about this. This is where you can start adding in the anonymity. So the LLC will provide you the protection. You create the anonymity by using a trust, and that trust in turn owns the LLC. The great thing about these trusts is that they're revocable trusts. There's no additional tax filings or anything that you have to do on a yearly basis to maintain those trusts. It's simply creating the trust and being proactive gives you the additional protections without any additional costs. Now, the great part about it is if you use the trust and the LLC, and these are both created by an attorney, then all of the information about those LLCs is additionally protected by the attorney-client privilege. And when created through a law firm, all of the information regarding where was any of this documentation created and where does it all point back to also points back to an attorney. So you can literally start to own these companies anonymously with everything channeling back through a law firm. This allows you the ability to become invisible by using what we would call an agent trust, which is just a type of revocable trust that we use to create this anonymity. And this agent trust is going to be listed as the member or the manager of the LLC. And we structure this agent trust under the common law, and this avoids any type of fees or registration. And your bank accounts related to any of the transactions for these LLCs are actually held inside of the LLC itself and not the trust. And because the trust is a type of revocable trust, we don't have to file any additional tax return associated with it or any other type of operational time or expense that would go into being able to have this extra layer of protection. So literally everything in your life stays exactly the same way it is now. You just have additional protections and additional anonymity in place. Now, this helps you prevent lawsuits, as you can see here, because you can own the LLC itself anonymously here through the agent trust. And if you were clued in to our presentation, our masterclass on land trust, you will also have seen of how can you own individual properties through trusts that are very like these very kin to these agent trusts that allow you to be able to own not just your company anonymously, but also your assets anonymously. So it looks like you don't own really anything on paper. You know, nobody sues somebody that looks like they qualify for food stamps. So our goal is to make you look like a beggar on paper if anybody ever looks to sue you. And if you ever need to prove your net worth for financing or any other reason, all you have to simply do is produce that private paperwork, take it out of your safe, show it to whoever you want to, and bam, there you go. They're able to see that, hey, you're actually the true owner of all of those assets. Now, you can add a tax strategy in, like I mentioned before, with these LLCs by using an S Corp. So even though you'll have the one trust per asset that we talked about, if you're owning real estate, and you're adding that LLC to the mix to be able to say, hey, I want anonymity and I want protection, you can then use the S Corporation tax selection and say, hey, the money flowing through that LLC, I want you to tax me as an S Corporation instead of an LLC. And what that allows you to do is to divide the income in a way that helps you to avoid self-employment tax, which is typically about a 7 to 8% difference inside of your total taxable amount at the end of the year. So that's a very sizable amount of taxes. Now, guys, I want to give you a brief zoom out of everything that we do so you can see what does the full map and picture look like beyond just the two things that we talked about today. So the two things that we talked about today were how do we use LLCs for our asset holding company, which is having an agent trust that would then own an LLC so we can then own the LLC anonymously, and how can we break down individual LLCs into with land trust to own all of our assets anonymously. And the important part too is about having these LLCs owned by trusts is that we want those LLCs to be anonymous, not just on year one filing, but on all the subsequent public information reports. So really hot tip, and when you're looking online to be able to say, hey, well, isn't a Wyoming LLC like de facto anonymous? And you'll see that we use that here. That's true, but you need to form the Wyoming LLC with an anonymous trust. So that way in year two, when you have to disclose anything about the ownership of that LLC, well, it still points to an anonymous trust at that point, again, all filed through a law firm. We also talked about how to use the LLC as an operating company, and that's what you see here on slides number 6 and 4. This is where you're going to be conducting all of your active business. So this entity structure owns all of your assets. Soft assets can be held up here inside of your Wyoming entity. Any of your hard assets are held inside of the individual LLCs. And here on the operating company, this is where all of your active business is located. So if you're a real estate investor, this is where you're going to be, signing leases, hiring contractors. If you have another active business, an Amazon.com business or whatever the case may be, that can also be over here. But you see there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle that we're covering inside of our other master classes. Like we have one that's particularly on land trusts. Keep one that's on the lookout here about how to use these types of retirement accounts with the self-directed IRA and the solo 401k to be able to put money into your own retirement accounts. We're talking over $60,000 a year into your own retirement accounts, and then how you can personally direct those funds to make investments, and you can even loan that money back to yourself in some cases in case you ever run into a cash bench. I mean, imagine that, being able to loan yourself money back that's all pre-tax dollars. I mean, you just end up with a third more money and then get to loan it to yourself. That's a beautiful strategy. For higher net worth investors, we also would talk about how to use an offshore trust. So if you're over $500,000 to $1 million in net worth, this is a great time to start thinking about, hey, well, maybe I want an extra insurance policy using an offshore trust to ensure that if the worst case scenario happens, my hard-earned cash and stocks and other investments that are soft assets are not at risk. And additionally, how are we going to think about how these assets are going to pass to our heirs? And that's where we start looking at the living trust and part of our estate plan. And without the living trust and the estate plan, the government actually makes all the decisions for you. All of the assets become part of the public record. Who those assets go to is decided by the government, and you have zero control of it. So if you have children, or if you care about what happens to your assets after you die, you need to have these estate planning pieces put together. And this is how they all form together with your operating companies and asset holding companies. So a quick owner's manual on how to use the LLC. For holding your assets, you're simply going to have one LLC as a hub here. This is your Wyoming LLC. And that it'll have individual LLCs underneath it, each of them with their own individual land trust or property. All of your soft assets can be held here, and all of your hard assets are held in individual LLCs underneath it. Now, the great part about us is when you're combining with this LLC strategy with the land trust, you're able to create anonymity and protection with each of your individual assets. You can actually transfer any of your properties, however they're held now, into these land trusts without having to violate the due on sale clause per the St. Germain Act. And you're also able to create the anonymity that is so important that stops the lawsuits before they start. When you're buying property, it's very simple. You just purchase the property inside of your personal name and then transfer the property after the fact using a warranty deed into the land trust. And we use a warranty deed because that's how you're able to preserve title insurance by transferring the property with warranties. We'll leave that title insurance intact. Now, when you sell a property, you can either sell a property directly out of the trust, or what you can do is move the property out of the trust in your personal name and then sell it from your personal name to the third party. This a lot of times depends on what the title company is going to be most familiar with and comfortable with. We're happy to do it either way in conjunction with these title companies. And as you can imagine, with over 2,000 clients, we've done these transactions hundreds and thousands of times, right? So it's a very, very smooth process of how do you do that. And typically only costs a couple $100 at the time of sale to be able to conduct the additional paperwork required to be able to sell that asset. When you want to refinance, again, very simply deed the property back into your personal name, refinance that property, and move it back into the trust. Because these deeds are now templatized, they're very easy to create. And again, it's only a couple $100 to be able to conduct that transfer at the time that whenever you would need to do it. One important note on this, though, is when you're transferring the properties out, it's very important to check with your financing institution regarding what is the seasoning requirements to hold the asset. But if you're a member of the Royal Legal Solutions family office, not to worry, we're there to hold your hand through that process to ensure that you have the adequate and appropriate game plan for when are you going to be refinancing and what are the steps that we need to dot the I's and cross the T's on to make sure that process is going to go smoothly. But I just want to reassure you that even with these structures, everything that you would want to do and accomplish from a business objective standpoint is all possible. So a couple of frequently asked questions that we typically run into about LLCs is, how do the taxes work? And the answer is the taxes will work for you exactly how they do now. If you're a solo individual that owns that LLC, it's treated as a pass-through entity, and all the income flows to your personal return as a disregarded entity. If you're two people that own it, it's typically going to be a partnership return. And your banking and accounting, each LLC that we've talked about here, and the hub and spoke kind of model that we've been talking about, where you have one LLC at the top and then individual LLCs at the bottom, each one of those would need its own bank account and maintain its own set of accounting records. And another thing that people commonly ask us about is, do I need insurance when I'm using the land trust, and how would I do that? Well, a lot of times what you're able to do, and almost all the time, is that you can just add the name of the land trust to your existing policy as an additional insured. And then how much can it cost to set up these types of asset protection structures? And what I tell people is it's a lot like going to a doctor and asking the doctor without him seeing you, well, what kind of medication do I need? So what I can tell you is that it ranges anywhere from about $950 on the low end for most of our clients, all the way up to $10,000 plus, depending if somebody has a much larger portfolio. But what we like to do is say, great, why don't we sit down and actually come up with what it would cost for us to put it together? And maybe there's a lesser solution that you would need right now if you don't have the cash or the cash flow to build more of the infrastructure. It's very important that you maintain a good ROI on your portfolios when you're going to financial freedom, and we get that, and we understand that there might be a good starting place that we can just build in one first brick of protection, and then we can add those layers on without ever having to go back and redo anything. So you don't have to start at the end with the most fancy, pieces all put together. You can just start at the very beginning level, and then over time be able to build your infrastructure just like you're building your portfolio. And then how long does it take? Well, this can depend upon the government, turnaround times with certain clerks. So we say typically it's usually around 2 to 6 weeks to go from whatever condition you're at now. If you're owning property in your personal name, you're completely unprotected, to completely protected within as little as 2 to 6 weeks. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. Of course, my name is Scott Royal Smith. This has been a presentation by Royal Legal Solutions on limited liability companies. And the thing to do next, guys, is to take the quiz. Go to royallegalsolutions.com and take the quiz that we have on that page. It's where we're able to capture the most important information about you that we use to compare to the other 2,000 investors that we've worked with. And that gives us a good place to start to say, hey, what are the best practices that we've seen for people that are in your exact situation? So we can start to give you the content, give you the information that we know is going to be most helpful for you. So you can then decide, does it make sense for us to be able to do some business together and for us to help build some of these structures for you? If it doesn't make sense, that's fine. I'd still love to be able to have the opportunity to provide you with the information that I've learned after working with over 2,000 real estate investors all over the country. And if you want that kind of tailored information that is specific to your situation and not have to pay any money for it, all you have to do is go to royallegalsolutions.com and take the quiz. Thank you.